The first thing he
You're
heard
always
was the sound of his
blaming me.
daughter's body
I'm just
hitting the
trying to
kitchen
protect
floor.
you.
By pushing
It was
me
not a
away?
scream.
Maybe I am.
It was not a cry. It was the dull, sickening impact of bone and tile, followed by the clatter of the glass she had been holding shattering against the cabinet. For a moment, Daniel did not move because his brain refused to accept that the sound belonged to his house, to his child, to this night that had begun like any other. He was in the hallway when it happened. The light above him flickered. He told himself it was the bulb, not his vision narrowing. "Lena?" he called out, but the word broke halfway through her name, turning thin and useless. When he reached the kitchen doorway, she was on her side. Her hair spread across the tile like something spilled and forgotten. There was blood, too much of it for a scraped knee. It moved in a thin line from the back of her head toward the grout between the tiles. Daniel dropped beside her and turned her gently. And that was when he saw the small cut above her temple, and the way her eyes were open but unfocused, as if she were trying to look past him. He pressed his hand against the wound, even though he did not know if that was right, even though his fingers were already slipping. "Stay with me," he said, his voice louder now, almost angry. "Lena, look at me. Look at me." But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking somewhere else, somewhere behind his shoulder, somewhere he could not follow. He did not remember dialing emergency services. He remembered shouting into the phone. He remembered the operator asking questions he could not answer clearly. He remembered saying, "She just fell," and hearing the tremor in his own voice and hating it. Because she had not just fallen. She had been arguing with him moments earlier, her voice sharp, her face flushed, and he had raised his voice back. "You don't get to tell me what to do," she had said. "You're never even here." And he had replied, "I'm here now, aren't I?" Which had been a cruel thing to say, because it was not true in any way that mattered. When the paramedics arrived, he stepped back, his hands sticky, his mind echoing with the sound of her hitting the floor. One of them asked him what happened. He said it again. She slipped. The word felt too small for the damage in the room. They worked around her with quiet efficiency. They asked her name. They shone lights into her eyes. They lifted her onto a stretcher. Daniel watched, feeling like a guest in his own house. At some point, one of them asked, "Did she lose consciousness?" And he hesitated for a second too long. "I don't know," he said. "I don't think so. She was yelling at me, and then she just..." He stopped. He did not finish the sentence. He did not say that she had tried to move past him, that he had grabbed her arm, that she had pulled away harder than he expected. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and flashing lights. He followed in his car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, replaying the last 10 minutes over and over. He could see her face in the reflection of the windshield, not as she lay on the stretcher, but as she had stood in front of him, furious and alive. "I'm not a child," she had said. "You don't get to control everything." He had stepped closer. Too close. He remembered that now. He remembered the way she had leaned back, her heel catching on the edge of the rug near the kitchen entrance. He remembered reaching out, not to push, not to harm, but to stop her from leaving the conversation, from leaving him in that moment of being wrong. His fingers had wrapped around her wrist. She had twisted. There had been a flash of movement, a stumble, a loss of balance. The rest was gravity. At the hospital, they did not let him see her immediately. They asked him to wait in a small room with pale walls and a clock that ticked too loudly. A nurse took his statement. He repeated the word "slipped" again and again until it began to sound like a lie even to him. "Was there any physical altercation?" the nurse asked gently, not accusing, just precise. "No," he said too quickly. "We were arguing, that's all." The nurse nodded but did not write anything for a moment. That pause was worse than any accusation. Daniel felt the weight of it pressing against his chest. He thought of his wife, Mara, who had left 3 years earlier. She had said, "You don't hit, Daniel. That's not the problem. You just press. You press and press until there's no air left in the room." He had dismissed her words then, told her she was exaggerating, that arguments were normal, that raising his voice did not make him violent. Now he was sitting in a hospital room, and his daughter was behind a set of double doors, and he was replaying the exact moment his hand closed around her wrist. A doctor finally came in, young, composed, with tired eyes. "Mr. Halvorson." Daniel stood before the doctor even finished speaking his name. "Your daughter has a concussion and a laceration that required stitches. There's some swelling, but the CT scan doesn't show any major bleeding. We're going to keep her overnight for observation." Daniel exhaled in a way that almost felt like relief, except it was too sharp, too painful. "Is she awake?" he asked. "She was, briefly," the doctor replied. "She's drowsy now. That's expected." "Did she say anything?" Daniel asked before he could stop himself. The doctor hesitated. "She asked if she fell." Daniel's throat tightened. And what did you tell her? We said we'd talk about it when she's more alert. When he was finally allowed to see her, she looked smaller in the hospital bed. The fluorescent lights drained the color from her face. There was a bandage near her temple. An IV line ran into her arm. He stood at the foot of the bed, afraid to get closer. Her eyes opened slowly. She blinked, as if trying to recognize the room. When she saw him, something flickered across her expression. Not fear. Not exactly, but something that made him feel as if he had already lost something he could not name. "Dad," she whispered. "I'm here," he said quickly, stepping closer. "You slipped. You hit your head. It was an accident." She watched him for a long second. "Did we fight?" she asked. The question sliced through him because it meant she remembered enough to doubt him. "We were talking," he said. "It got heated, but you slipped. That's all." She closed her eyes again, as if that answer required too much energy to process. "Okay," she murmured, but the word did not sound convinced. He sat beside her bed and held her hand, careful this time, painfully gentle. He wanted to say he was sorry, but sorry for what? For arguing? For grabbing her? For not letting go sooner? The specifics felt dangerous. If he named them, they would solidify into something real. Later that night, when she was asleep, a police officer entered the room quietly. Daniel saw the uniform and felt his stomach drop. The officer spoke in a low voice. "Mr. Halverson, we received a report from hospital staff. Standard procedure in cases involving head injuries and domestic arguments." "It wasn't domestic violence," Daniel said immediately, the words tumbling over each other. "We were arguing." She slipped. The officer nodded, but his eyes remained steady. "I'd like to ask you a few questions." They stepped into the hallway. The officer asked about the argument. About physical contact. About Daniel's relationship with his daughter. Daniel answered carefully, choosing words that sounded calm, rational. He said, "I grabbed her arm to steady her." He did not say, "I was trying to stop her from walking away." "And she fell immediately after?" the officer asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. "She lost her balance." The officer wrote something down. "Did you push her?" "No," Daniel said, louder than intended. "I would never push my daughter." The officer studied him for a moment. "We'll need to speak with her when she's able." Daniel nodded, feeling the ground beneath him shift. If Lena remembered more than he thought, if she described his grip differently, if she said she felt shoved instead of steadied, then the story would fracture. When he returned to her room, she was awake again, staring at the ceiling. "The police were here," she said quietly. "It's routine," he replied. "Hospitals have to report injuries like this." She turned her head slowly toward him. "Did you tell them I fell?" "Yes," he said. She swallowed. "I don't remember exactly how it happened." His heart pounded. "You tripped. I tried to catch you." Her eyes lingered on his face. "You were angry." "I was," he admitted. "But that doesn't mean I hurt you." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "Finally," she said, "it felt like you didn't want me to leave." The statement was simple. It was not an accusation. It was worse. It was an observation. "I didn't," he said, before he could stop himself. "I didn't want you to walk away." "And so you grabbed me," she replied. "Yes," he whispered. "And then I fell." He nodded, unable to shape the narrative any further, without it collapsing entirely. She closed her eyes again, and he could not tell whether she was drifting back to sleep or retreating from him. The next morning, Mara arrived. He had called her in the middle of the night, his voice breaking in a way he had not allowed in years. She entered the hospital room with a controlled urgency, her eyes scanning Lena first, then him. "What happened?" she demanded quietly once Lena was asleep again. "She slipped," he said automatically. Mara's gaze hardened. "Daniel, we were arguing," he admitted. "I grabbed her arm. She lost her balance." "You grabbed her," Mara repeated, as if testing the weight of the words. "I didn't push her," he insisted. "I would never." "I know you wouldn't hit her," Mara interrupted. "But you don't have to hit someone to hurt them." The sentence hung in the air, echoing something she had said years ago. Daniel felt the walls of the hospital room closing in. "She's going to tell the police," Mara said softly. "They already spoke to me downstairs." "And what did you say?" he asked. "I said I wasn't there," she replied. "I said you two argue sometimes." "Sometimes?" he echoed bitterly. "Daniel," she said, her voice dropping. "If she feels unsafe, they will take this further." "I didn't make her unsafe," he snapped. "I was trying to talk to her. By holding her in place?" He had no answer. Later that day, a social worker joined the police officer in Lena's room. Daniel was asked to step outside. He stood in the hallway, watching through the small window in the door as his daughter spoke. her expression serious despite the bandage on her head. He tried to read her lips. He tried to see whether she gestured, whether she mimed, being pushed or simply stumbling. The minutes felt like hours. When they finally emerged, the officer's expression was neutral. "We'll be in touch," he said. "With what?" Daniel asked. "With next steps." That phrase was a void. It contained everything and nothing. When Lena was discharged that evening, she chose to go home with Mara. "Just for a few days," she said, not meeting Daniel's eyes. "Until I feel better." He nodded, telling himself it was temporary, telling himself it made sense. But when he watched her walk away from him in the hospital parking lot, supported by her mother, he felt the beginning of something irreversible. As he drove back to the empty house, the kitchen light still flickered. The tile had been cleaned, but he could still see where the blood had seeped into the grout. He stood in the doorway, replaying the sound of her fall, the exact angle of her body, the pressure of his fingers on her wrist. He whispered to the empty room. It was an accident. But the word accident no longer felt neutral. It felt like a plea. His phone buzzed. A message from Mara. "They're opening an investigation." Daniel stared at the screen, his reflection faint in the glass. He typed back, "For what?" Her response came quickly. "For potential assault." He felt the ground drop beneath him again, this time deeper. Assault was a word that did not fit inside his self-image. It belonged to other men. Worse, men. Men who struck, who bruised, who left visible marks. He looked down at his hands, remembering how tightly he had held her. He flexed his fingers as if testing their innocence. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. He walked into the kitchen and stood exactly where he had been during the argument. He tried to recreate it in his mind. He tried to find the precise moment where he could have let go, and did not. "You don't get to tell me what to do," she had said. He had felt something twist inside him then. Not anger exactly, but fear. Fear that she was slipping away, that he was losing authority, relevance, control. He had thought grabbing her wrist was a way to keep the conversation alive. He had not considered that it might end something instead. The next morning, there was a knock on the door. Not loud, not aggressive, but firm. Daniel opened it to find the same police officer from the hospital. "Mr. Halvorsen," he said, "we need you to come in for a formal statement." Daniel nodded slowly. "Am I under arrest?" "Not at this time," the officer replied. "Not at this time." The phrase echoed in his head as he grabbed his coat. As he stepped outside, he glanced back at the kitchen one more time. The light flickered again, casting brief shadows across the tile. For a split second, he imagined he could see Lena standing there, arms crossed, eyes defiant. Then the image vanished. He closed the door behind him and followed the officer to the car, knowing that whatever he said next would not only define what happened on that kitchen floor, but would determine whether his daughter ever felt safe walking away from him again. The station was colder than he expected, not in temperature, but in tone. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, and every surface looked designed to erase warmth. The officer led him into a small interview room with a metal table bolted to the floor. There was no two-way mirror, just a camera in the corner and a file already resting on the table. "Have a seat," the officer said. Daniel sat. His hands rested on the metal surface. He could see faint scratches etched into it, initials carved by someone else who had once been here trying to explain themselves. Another officer entered, older, slower in his movements. He introduced himself as Detective Rowe. His voice was calm, not hostile. That almost made it worse. "We just want to clarify a few things," Rowe said, sitting opposite him. "Your daughter gave her statement this morning." Daniel's throat tightened. "What did she say?" Rowe folded his hands. "She said you grabbed her wrist during an argument. She said she tried to pull away. She said she lost her balance and fell." Daniel nodded quickly. "That's what happened." Rowe watched him carefully. "She also said she felt you were holding her, so she couldn't leave." Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. "I wasn't restraining her. I was trying to get her to listen." Rowe tilted his head slightly. "Do you hear the difference?" Daniel hesitated. "I hear semantics." Rowe leaned back. "Semantics are often where responsibility hides." The word struck harder than any accusation. Daniel clenched his jaw. "I didn't intend for her to fall." "We're not talking about intent yet," Rowe replied. "We're talking about control. Control." The word lingered between them. Daniel felt something in his stomach twist again, that familiar fear disguised as indignation. "She's 16, Daniel said. "She was shouting at me. She was storming out. Parents grab their kids sometimes. Parents can also frighten their kids sometimes," Rowe said evenly. Daniel's mind flashed back to Lena's face in the hospital bed. Not fear, not exactly, but something close. "I didn't frighten her," he insisted, though the conviction behind the statement was weaker now. Roe opened the file. This isn't the first time you've been described as physically assertive during arguments. Daniel looked up sharply. What does that mean? There's a note from 3 years ago, Roe said. When your wife filed for separation. She mentioned feeling physically cornered during disputes. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. Cornered isn't the same as assaulted. No, Roe agreed. But patterns matter. The word pattern made his chest tighten. He had always told himself he wasn't like other men. He didn't drink excessively. He didn't raise a fist. He worked hard. He provided. He stayed. But he also remembered standing in doorways, blocking exits unintentionally. He remembered stepping closer when someone stepped back. He remembered believing proximity equaled persuasion. I never hit anyone, Daniel said quietly. Roe nodded. I believe you. That almost broke him. Because belief did not erase consequences. They continued for another hour. Questions about the argument, about Lena's curfew, about his temper, about whether he had ever sought counseling after the divorce. Daniel answered everything. He tried to sound cooperative. He tried to sound like a man who had nothing to hide. When they finally let him leave, Roe said, We're not pressing charges at this moment, but Child Protective Services will conduct their own assessment. Assessment of what? Daniel asked. Whether your daughter feels safe in your care. The word safe echoed louder than assault. Because safe was subjective. Safe lived inside Lena's memory of that moment, not inside his. He drove home in silence. His mind replayed the phrase, whether your daughter feels safe in your care. He had always believed safety was about external threats, locked doors, paid bills, steady routines. He had never considered that safety might collapse in the space between two raised voices. That evening, his phone rang. It was Lena. He answered immediately. How are you feeling? I'm okay, she said. Her voice sounded distant, as if filtered through something thicker than distance. They kept you for observation, right? Yes. He waited. She did not fill the silence. I went to the station, he said. They asked questions. I know, she replied. They talked to me too. Did you tell them it was an accident? He asked, hating the way the question sounded even as he said it. She exhaled softly. I told them you didn't push me. Relief surged, but it was thin. Thank you. That's not what I'm worried about, she added. He swallowed. What are you worried about? I'm worried that you don't see it, she said. See what? That you scared me. The words landed with more force than any legal threat. I wasn't trying to scare you, he said quickly. I know, she replied. That's what makes it worse. Silence again. He pressed his hand against his forehead. When you grabbed me, she continued, it felt like you weren't listening anymore. It felt like I wasn't a person. I was just something you needed to hold still. Daniel closed his eyes. He could picture his own face in that moment. Tight, determined, certain he was right. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, he said. I know, she repeated. But you did. After they hung up, he sat in the dark living room without turning on the lights. He let the words circle in his head. It felt like I wasn't a person. He tried to argue with the memory. He tried to recall his own internal state. He had been frustrated, worried, afraid she was making choices that would hurt her future. But had he been listening? Or had he been trying to win? The next day, a social worker named Evelyn arrived at his house. She was in her mid-30s, composed, with a folder tucked under her arm. I'm here to conduct a home assessment, she said gently. Daniel stepped aside to let her in. The house was spotless. He had cleaned the kitchen twice. The tile gleamed unnaturally. Evelyn walked through the room slowly. She asked about routines, about discipline, about his work schedule, about how often he and Lena argued. Teenagers argue, Daniel said. That's normal. Yes, Evelyn agreed. It is. She paused in the kitchen. This is where it happened? Yes. Can you walk me through it? He did, carefully. He described the argument. He described grabbing her wrist. He demonstrated lightly in the air. He described her pulling away. Did you feel angry? Evelyn asked. I felt frustrated, he replied. That's not the same question, she said. He hesitated. Yes, I was angry. At her? Evelyn asked. At the situation, he corrected automatically. She gave him a look that suggested she had heard that distinction many times before. Do you often feel the need to physically stop conversations from ending? She asked. He frowned. That's not what I do. Then what do you do? I try to make sure we resolve things. And if the other person wants space? He did not answer immediately, because space felt like abandonment. Space felt like losing control of the narrative. I don't like unresolved conflict, he said finally. Unresolved conflict isn't the same as unresolved control, Evelyn replied. The word control again. It was everywhere now. as if the world had collectively decided that was the core of him. After she left, Daniel felt more exhausted than after the police interview. Because Evelyn had not accused him of anything criminal. She had simply peeled back layers he had never examined. That night, Mara called. "They're recommending Lena stay with me temporarily," she said. "How temporary?" Daniel asked. "Until they complete their review." "And how long is that?" "Weeks, maybe months." His chest tightened. "You think I'm dangerous?" "I think you don't see how intense you are," she replied. "And I think Lena needs distance right now." "Distance from me," he said bitterly. "Yes." He paced the living room. "You're turning her against me." "No," Mara said quietly. "You're doing that yourself." He wanted to argue. He wanted to list every sacrifice he had made, every overtime shift, every weekend spent driving her to activities. But none of that erased the image of his hand gripping her wrist. "Tell her I'm sorry," he said finally. "You can tell her yourself," Mara replied, "but don't make it about you." After the call ended, Daniel walked back into the kitchen. He stood in the exact spot where he had been during the argument. He closed his eyes and tried to relive it honestly. He saw Lena's face again, not just angry, hurt. She had been telling him she felt suffocated, that he monitored her phone too much, that he questioned every friend. He had told himself he was protecting her, but protection without trust starts to look like possession. The following week, Lena began therapy as part of the investigation process. Daniel was required to attend individual counseling as well. His therapist, Dr. Kessler, was older, soft-spoken, and unflinchingly direct. "Tell me what you're afraid of," Kessler said during their second session. "I'm afraid of losing my daughter," Daniel replied. "And before the fall?" Kessler asked. Daniel paused. "I was afraid she was slipping away." "In what way?" "She's becoming independent. She doesn't tell me everything. She pushes back." "That's developmentally appropriate," Kessler said. "I know that," Daniel snapped, then immediately regretted the tone. I don't want to be irrelevant." "Relevance and control are not the same," Kessler said calmly. There it was again. Control. "I don't try to control her," Daniel insisted. "Then why was it so intolerable for her to walk away from that argument?" Kessler asked. Daniel stared at the floor. "Because if she walks away, I lose the chance to fix it." "Or you lose the chance to dominate it," Kessler replied. The word dominate felt harsher than control. It made him flinch. "I'm not a violent man," Daniel said. "Violence isn't always loud," Kessler responded. "Sometimes it's about constriction." The sessions became increasingly uncomfortable. Daniel found himself replaying past arguments with Mara. He remembered blocking doorways. He remembered raising his voice until it filled every corner of a room. He had never struck anyone, but he had made sure his presence was unavoidable. Meanwhile, Lena's messages grew shorter. She was polite but distant. She answered his calls less frequently. When they met in supervised visits arranged by the social worker, she sat across from him with measured caution. "I don't hate you," she said during one visit. "I just don't trust that you won't do it again." "I won't grab you again," he promised. "That's not what I mean," she replied. He looked at her helplessly. "Then what?" "I don't trust that you'll let me leave when I need to," she said. The statement carved into him. Because he knew she was right. Weeks passed. The investigation remained open. There were no charges filed, but there was no closure either. The ambiguity stretched like a wire pulled too tight. One evening, Daniel received a letter. It was a formal notice recommending a temporary restraining order regarding unsupervised contact. His vision blurred as he read it. He called Mara immediately. "You're filing a restraining order?" "It's not about punishment," she said. "It's about space." "Space?" he echoed. "You're cutting me out of her life." "I'm trying to keep her from feeling trapped," Mara replied. "I'm not trapping her," he insisted. "Daniel," she said, her voice breaking slightly for the first time. "You don't see how heavy you are." Heavy. That was a new word. Not violent, not abusive. Heavy. He hung up and sank into the kitchen chair. The house felt emptier than ever. The silence pressed against him. He picked up his phone and stared at Lena's contact name. He wanted to call her, to beg, to promise change, but he knew promises meant nothing now. Instead, he typed a message. "I'm trying to understand." He stared at it for a long time before pressing send. Her reply came an hour later. "Understanding doesn't erase what happened." He read the sentence over and over. It wasn't angry. It was factual. He walked to the sink and gripped the edge of the counter. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. But meaning had stopped mattering. The next therapy session, he told Kessler about the restraining order recommendation. "How does that make you feel?" Kessler asked. "Like I'm being punished for something I didn't intend." And how does Lena feel? Kessler countered. Like she's protecting herself. And which of those feelings is more urgent right now? Kessler asked. Daniel did not answer. Because he knew the truth. His sense of injustice was loud. But her sense of fear was heavier. Outside the office, the world moved normally. Cars passed. People walked their dogs. Nothing about the external world reflected the internal fracture spreading through his life. He realized something slowly, painfully. The fall had not been the moment everything broke. It had been the moment everything visible broke. The real fracture had been building for years. And now it was spreading. He drove home again to the silent house. He stood in the kitchen one more time. He placed his hand lightly on the counter where he had once held her wrist. He imagined her trying to pull away. And for the first time, he allowed himself to see the moment not from his perspective, but from hers. The proximity, the raised voice, the hand that would not let go. His chest tightened until breathing felt difficult. He whispered into the empty room, "I was wrong." But the words did not travel anywhere. They stayed inside the house, circling the tile floor where she had fallen, and the investigation was still open. That phrase settled into his life like a permanent weather system. It followed him into work, into sleep, into the quiet moments when he tried to distract himself with routine. It meant nothing had resolved. It meant every conversation could tilt into consequence. It meant Lena's perception of him was being evaluated not only emotionally but institutionally. At work, he found himself overcompensating. He spoke more softly in meetings. He allowed colleagues to interrupt without pushing back. When a junior analyst challenged his projections, he felt the familiar flare of irritation rise in his chest, but he swallowed it. He leaned back instead of forward. He forced himself to say, "Tell me more." The words felt foreign, like a costume he had to consciously wear. His supervisor, Martin, noticed the shift. "You seem distracted," Martin said one afternoon, closing the office door behind him. "Everything okay at home?" Daniel hesitated. He considered deflecting, but the pressure inside him had nowhere else to go. "There's an investigation," he admitted. "About my daughter." Martin's expression tightened. "Legal?" "Not exactly. Child Protective Services." Martin exhaled slowly. "Is she safe?" "Yes," Daniel replied immediately. Then he paused. "She's physically safe." Martin studied him for a moment. "That's not what I asked." Daniel felt exposed. "I never hit her." "I didn't assume you did," Martin said. "But safety is more complicated than that." The word again. Complicated. Heavy. Control. They all orbited the same center. At night, sleep became fragmented. He would drift off only to jolt awake with the sound of her body hitting the tile replaying in his head. In some dreams, she fell in slow motion, and he never reached her in time. In others, she stood up immediately after the fall, looked at him with something colder than anger, and said, "Now you have proof." "Proof of what?" he would ask in the dream, but she would never answer. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. It wasn't criminal, but it carried weight. If granted, it would formalize the distance that already existed between them. He met with a lawyer recommended by a colleague. The lawyer, a woman in her 40s named Denise, listened carefully as he recounted everything. "You're not facing criminal charges right now," she said, "but the court will prioritize the child's perception of safety." "She said I didn't push her," Daniel replied quickly. "That helps," Denise acknowledged. "But she also said she felt restrained." "It was 1 second, he insisted. 1 second of grabbing her wrist." Denise leaned forward. "The court doesn't measure seconds, it measures patterns." That word again, pattern. It felt like an accusation that reached backward into years he had never examined closely. "Is there any history of physical discipline?" Denise asked. "No," Daniel said. "I've never spanked her, never hit her." "Have you ever blocked her from leaving a room?" He hesitated. "Not intentionally." "That's not an answer," Denise said calmly. He rubbed his forehead. "Sometimes I stand in the doorway during arguments. And if she tries to leave? I try to finish the conversation." "By standing there?" "Yes." Denise nodded slowly. "You need to understand how that sounds." He did. He just didn't want to. The hearing arrived faster than he expected. Lena sat beside Mara across the courtroom. She looked older somehow. Not physically, but in the way she held herself. Measured, guarded. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't look at him. "I don't think my dad meant to hurt me," she said clearly. "But I don't feel like I can leave when I need to. I feel like he needs to win." The word win cut through him. The judge asked, "Do you feel unsafe?" Lena hesitated. That pause felt endless. "I feel overwhelmed," she said finally. "And when he's angry, I don't know how far it will go." Daniel's lawyer squeezed his arm lightly, a silent reminder not to react. He kept his face still, but inside, everything churned. The judge granted a temporary order for supervised visitation only. It was not permanent, it was not criminal, but it formalized what Lena had already enacted emotionally. Outside the courtroom, Daniel tried to approach her. Mara stepped slightly in front of Lena without touching him. "I just want to talk," Daniel said. "You can talk during supervised visits," Mara replied. Lena finally looked at him. Her eyes were not hostile. They were tired. "I need you to listen," she said softly. "Not argue." "I am listening," he replied, too quickly. "That's the problem," she said. He opened his mouth to respond, but she had already turned away. Supervised visits took place in a neutral facility, a room with soft chairs and muted colors designed to make conflict less visible. An observer sat quietly in the corner, pretending not to hear but documenting everything. During the first visit, Daniel sat across from Lena, his hands clasped in his lap. "How's school?" he asked. "Fine. Any headaches?" "Sometimes." He nodded. The conversation felt artificial, stripped of anything real. The observer's pen moved across paper intermittently. "I've been going to therapy," Daniel said. "Good," Lena replied. "I'm trying to understand." She met his eyes briefly. "Understanding isn't something you announce." The comment stung because it was precise. "I know," he said. I don't want to lose you." "You're not losing me," she replied. "You're just not controlling me." There it was again. Control. He felt his jaw tighten reflexively, but he forced it to relax. "I never wanted to control you," he said carefully. "But you did," she responded. "Even if you didn't call it that." Silence settled between them. He noticed how she kept a slight physical distance, even in a supervised space. She leaned back in her chair rather than forward. "I need to feel like I can walk away," she said. "From arguments, from pressure, from you." "You can," he said immediately. She shook her head. "Not if you're standing in the doorway." The image flashed in his mind again, his body occupying space, his voice filling the room. The observer cleared her throat gently, signaling time was nearly up. As Lena stood to leave, Daniel resisted the urge to step closer. He stayed seated. He watched her walk to the door without obstruction. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. After she left, he remained in the chair for a long time. Therapy intensified. Dr. Kessler pushed harder. "You equate departure with rejection," Kessler said during one session. "Yes," Daniel admitted. "So, when someone tries to leave mid-conflict, what do you feel?" "Abandoned." "And what do you do with that feeling?" "I try to fix it." "How?" "By continuing the conversation." "Physically?" Daniel exhaled. "Sometimes." "Do you see how your need to avoid abandonment becomes someone else's loss of agency?" Kessler asked. The word agency lingered differently than control. It felt more personal, less accusatory, more relational. "I don't want her to feel trapped," Daniel said quietly. "But she does," Kessler replied. The investigation stretched into months. Reports were filed. Evaluations were completed. No criminal charges emerged, but the official recommendation was for continued supervised contact until Lena felt ready otherwise. The decision wasn't punitive, it was protective. That distinction did not make it easier to accept. One evening, Daniel received a call from Lena's therapist requesting a joint session. He agreed immediately. The room was neutral, softly lit. Lena sat beside her therapist. Daniel sat across from them. Dr. Kessler was also present. "Lena wants to explain something directly," her therapist said gently. Lena took a breath. "When you grabbed me, it wasn't just your hand. It was every argument before that." Daniel's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it wasn't 1 second, she said. "It was years of feeling like I couldn't leave until you were satisfied. I was trying to help you understand my point," he said. "You were trying to make sure I agreed," she corrected. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. The pattern was unfolding in real time. "I don't need you to agree with me," she continued. "I need you to let me disagree safely." The word safely again. It had become the axis around which everything turned. "I'm trying," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I know," she replied. "But trying doesn't undo fear." The therapist allowed silence to stretch. It was uncomfortable. It felt like standing on the edge of something unstable. "Do you think I'm dangerous?" Daniel asked finally. Lena considered the question. "I think you don't know how intense you are." The echo of Mara's words hit him hard. "I don't want to be intense," he said quietly. "Then you have to tolerate not winning," she replied. "Winning." The word surfaced again, raw and undeniable. He realized then that he had framed most conflicts as problems to be solved, rather than emotions to be held. He had believed resolution equaled closeness. He had never considered that sometimes closeness required stepping back, After the session, Lena did not hug him, but she did not recoil either. She simply said, "Keep going to therapy." "I will," he promised. As weeks passed, supervised visits grew slightly less rigid. Lena laughed once during a conversation about a school project. It startled him. The sound felt fragile, but progress was uneven. One visit ended abruptly when he interrupted her too sharply. The observer made a note. Lena's shoulders tensed. The old dynamic threatened to resurface. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "For what?" she asked. "For trying to correct you instead of listening." She studied him, assessing sincerity. "I need you to catch yourself," she said. "Not just apologize after." The demand felt fair. It also felt immense. Outside the structured visits, Daniel's life remained hollow. Friends drifted away, unsure how to engage. Work performance dipped. Martin called him in again. "You need to take some time," Martin said. "You're not present." "I can't afford time off," Daniel replied. "You can't afford to keep unraveling either," Martin said. He began to notice how often he tightened when someone disagreed with him. Even minor things. Restaurant choices. Traffic routes. He felt the urge to assert, to correct, to steer. He practiced letting it go. It felt like stepping off a ledge each time. One evening, alone in the kitchen, he placed a chair in the doorway deliberately. He stood behind it and imagined Lena trying to leave. He imagined himself stepping aside. He physically moved to the side of the doorway and stood there, allowing empty space to exist. The gesture felt absurd, but it also felt symbolic. "I will not block you," he whispered to the empty room. But whispers in an empty house did not carry weight beyond the walls. Months into the process, the social worker called with an update. "We're considering transitioning to unsupervised daytime visits," she said. "But it depends on Lena's comfort." Daniel felt a cautious flicker of hope. "What does she say?" "She says she's not ready yet," the social worker replied. The hope collapsed immediately. "Is there anything else I can do?" he asked. "Continue therapy. Continue demonstrating change. Consistency matters." Consistency. It required patience. Patience without guarantees. That night, he texted Lena, "I know you're not ready. I respect that." Her reply came hours later. "Thank you." It was small, but it was not hostile. He sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the tile where she had fallen. He realized something painful. The fall had become the anchor for every conversation, but it was not the whole story. The whole story was subtler, quieter, embedded in years of needing to be right, and the investigation was still technically open. The case had shifted from immediate risk to long-term evaluation. It was no longer about whether he pushed her. It was about whether he could change. He did not know which was harder to prove. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. The house was silent. No flickering light tonight, no echo of impact, just the weight of waiting, and the knowledge that progress could collapse with a single misstep. That awareness followed him into every interaction like a second heartbeat. It wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It pulsed quietly beneath his words, beneath his posture, beneath the way he positioned himself in rooms. He began to notice space the way he never had before. Doorways, corners, the distance between chairs, the angle of his shoulders when someone spoke. During therapy, Dr. Kessler asked him to reenact arguments verbally, but with one constraint. He was not allowed to persuade, only to reflect. "I think you're being unfair," Kessler would say, playing Lena's role. Daniel would feel the reflex ignite, the urge to explain, to correct, to contextualize. Instead, he forced himself to respond. "You feel I'm being unfair." It felt unnatural, passive, like conceding ground. "What do you feel when you don't counter?" Kessler asked. "Powerless," Daniel admitted. "And what do you do with that?" "I want to take it back." "That's the moment," Kessler said quietly. "That's where you grab the wrist." The simplicity of the statement unsettled him, because it was true. The grabbing had not begun in his hand. It had begun in his chest, in the panic of losing control of the narrative. Unsupervised daytime visits were finally approved after another month. Not overnight, not extended, just a few hours at a time. Lena arrived at the house one Saturday afternoon. She stood in the doorway as if evaluating it. The same house, the same tile, but different context. "You can leave whenever you want," Daniel said before she even stepped inside. She gave him a small, cautious look. "I know." He stepped fully away from the doorway, exaggerating the gesture slightly. He hated that it felt theatrical, but he needed her to see it. They sat in the living room, not the kitchen. The kitchen remained a quiet battlefield neither of them was ready to enter. "How's therapy?" he asked. "It's fine," she said. "What are you working on?" "Boundaries." The word hung between them. I'm working on that too, he replied. With me? She asked. With everyone. She nodded slowly. The first hour passed without incident. They talked about school, about a college fair coming up, about a new friend she had made. Daniel listened more than he spoke. When he felt the urge to advise, he paused. You should consider. He began once, then stopped. What do you think about it? She noticed the correction. He saw it in the way her posture softened slightly, but tension resurfaced when she mentioned wanting to attend an out-of-state university. That's far, he said automatically. She stiffened. I know. Financially, it's complicated, he continued, feeling the old pattern forming. I didn't say I was going, she replied. I said I'm considering it. He felt the urge to argue logistics, to highlight risks, to frame himself as practical. Instead, he swallowed. You're allowed to consider it. She watched him carefully, as if testing whether the permission was real. I need space to think, she added. You have it, he said. The words felt like stepping off that ledge again. Later, when she stood to leave, he remained seated. He did not follow her to the door. He did not fill the silence with reminders or advice. She paused at the doorway and looked back. Thank you for not making it hard, she said. He nodded, unable to speak without risking overstatement. But progress did not move in a straight line. 2 weeks later, during another visit, she confronted him about something from the past. You used to read my messages, she said suddenly. His stomach tightened. I was worried about who you were talking to. You didn't ask, she replied. You just checked. I'm your parent, he said defensively, before catching himself. That's not what I'm talking about, she insisted. You never asked why I needed privacy. The old reflex surged. The desire to justify, to frame it as protection. I thought I was keeping you safe, he said. You were keeping yourself calm, she replied quietly. The sentence struck harder than she probably intended. He felt his pulse rise. That's not fair, he said before he could stop himself. Her shoulders tensed. See? He closed his eyes briefly. He felt the heat in his chest, the tightening in his jaw. I'm doing it again, he admitted. Yes, she said. He forced himself to breathe slower. You're right. I didn't ask. I assumed. The tension in the room shifted slightly. Not resolved, but acknowledged. Why didn't you trust me? She asked. The question was simple. It carried years inside it. I was afraid, he said honestly. Of what? That you'd make choices I couldn't control. There it is, she replied. He did not argue this time. As the months progressed, the investigation began moving toward formal closure. Not because everything was healed, but because immediate risk had diminished. The final review meeting was scheduled for early spring. Daniel felt both relief and dread. Closure meant judgment. Even if no charges were filed, there would be an official summary, a documented narrative of who he had been during that fall. In therapy, he asked Kessler, what if she never fully trusts me again? Kessler did not soften the answer. She may not. The bluntness hurt. Then what's the point? Daniel asked. The point isn't to regain what you had, Kessler replied. It's to build something that doesn't require control to survive. Daniel stared at the floor. What if I can't? You already are, Kessler said. You're just uncomfortable. Uncomfortable felt like an understatement. The review meeting took place in a sterile conference room. Social workers, a representative from Child Protective Services, Lena, Mara, Daniel, everyone seated around a table that felt too small for the weight of the conversation. The lead social worker summarized findings. No evidence of intentional physical harm. A documented pattern of emotionally coercive behavior during conflicts. Significant improvement observed over recent months. Recommendation: case closure with continued voluntary counseling. The word coercive echoed in Daniel's ears. It was not criminal, but it was not neutral either. The social worker turned to Lena. Do you feel safe? Resuming regular contact? Lena hesitated. The pause felt like a second fall. I feel safer, she said finally, but I still need boundaries. The social worker nodded. That's appropriate. The case was officially closed. Outside the building, Daniel felt a strange emptiness. He had braced for something catastrophic. Instead, he received something quieter. A label, a warning, a chance. He turned to Lena. I'm glad it's over, he said. It's not over, she replied gently. It's just not being watched anymore. The accuracy of that statement unsettled him. They began transitioning to more normal contact. Dinners, short visits without supervision, occasional texting without formal check-ins. But new tension emerged from an unexpected direction. One evening, Lena called him late. Her voice was tight. I had a fight with Mom, she said. About what? He asked. She doesn't want me to take a gap year. Daniel felt the familiar surge of alignment, an opportunity to position himself as the reasonable parent. "Why do you want a gap year?" he asked carefully. "I don't know what I want yet," she said. "I feel pressured." The word pressure landed heavily. "What kind of pressure?" he asked. "From both of you," she replied. The statement caught him off guard. "From me?" "Yes," she said. "You're quieter now, but I can still feel it. Like you're waiting for me to make the right choice." He sat back slowly. "I don't want you to feel that," he said. "I know," she replied, "but it's there." He realized something unsettling. Even when he wasn't actively asserting control, she anticipated it. His history lingered in the space between them. "What would help?" he asked. "Don't look at me like you're evaluating," she said. He hadn't realized he was doing it. The next family session with both therapists present became more volatile than expected. Mara spoke first. "I think Lena needs stability. A gap year feels risky." Daniel felt the urge to counter, to present himself as the supportive alternative. Instead, he asked, "Lena, what does a gap year mean to you?" She explained, wanting time to travel, to work, to breathe. Mara's voice sharpened. "Breathe from what?" "From expectations," Lena replied. Silence. Daniel could feel tension rising between mother and daughter. The old part of him wanted to step in, to mediate, to steer. He stayed silent. Mara turned to him. "Say something." He felt the weight of that invitation, an opening to align, to influence. "I think she needs to decide without feeling cornered," he said slowly. Mara stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Yes," he replied. The room shifted. Not comfortably, but undeniably. After the session, Mara confronted him in the hallway. "You're trying to be the good one now?" she asked quietly. "I'm trying not to repeat myself," he replied. "She needs guidance," Mara insisted. "She needs room," he said. "And if she makes a mistake?" Mara asked. He paused. "Then she makes a mistake." The words tasted unfamiliar. Mara studied him for a long moment. "I don't know who you are lately. I'm figuring that out," he said. But the change came with a cost. At home, alone, Daniel felt adrift. His identity had been anchored in direction, in correction, in certainty. Without those impulses dominating his interactions, he felt undefined. One evening, he stood in the kitchen again. Not to relive the fall this time, but to confront the emptiness that followed the loss of control. He realized something else, slowly. Letting go did not bring peace. It brought vulnerability. It meant he could not shape outcomes. He could only influence them. And influence without force felt fragile. Lena eventually decided to take the gap year. She informed both parents calmly. "I'm going to work part-time and volunteer," she said. "I've planned it." Mara was visibly anxious. Daniel felt the reflex to caution, but he swallowed it. "Okay," he said. Lena looked at him, almost searching for resistance. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it," he replied. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." But later that night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. What if this was a mistake? What if she drifted further away? What if giving space meant permanent distance? The old panic stirred. He reached for his phone. He wanted to send a message reminding her to be careful, to budget, to think long-term. He set the phone down. The house remained silent. He realized then that restraint was not a single choice. It was a constant negotiation with fear. And even though the case was closed, the fracture in their relationship was not fully healed. It pulsed quietly beneath every interaction. Waiting. The waiting became its own presence in the house. It moved with him from room to room, sat across from him at the dinner table, lay beside him in bed. It was not dramatic. It did not shout. It simply existed, steady and unblinking, as if measuring how long he could sustain this new version of himself without slipping. Lena's gap year began in early summer. She found a job at a small bookstore downtown and started volunteering at a community center twice a week. She split her time between Mara's apartment and Daniel's house, though she still kept most of her belongings at her mother's place. Daniel noticed the imbalance, but did not comment. One evening, she came over after work, tired and smelling faintly of dust and paper. She dropped her bag by the couch and sank into the chair. "Long day?" he asked. "Inventory," she replied. "Boxes everywhere." He nodded. He wanted to ask how much she was earning, whether she was saving enough, whether the job had benefits. The questions lined up in his throat like soldiers waiting for command. Instead, he said, "Do you like it?" She looked up, surprised. "Yeah, I do. What do you like about it?" "It's quiet," she said. "People come in, browse, leave. No one's trying to win anything." The sentence landed heavier than she probably intended. He absorbed it without flinching. "That sounds good," he replied. She studied him briefly, as if assessing whether he would pivot into advice. When he didn't, she relaxed back into the chair. But the calm did not last. 2 weeks later, she came over, visibly agitated. She paced the living room instead of sitting. "I messed up," she said. He felt the old reflex surge immediately. "What happened?" "I forgot to log a shipment. It got misplaced." My manager was furious. Daniel's mind raced through solutions. Apologize formally. Double-check procedures. Create a system. His mouth opened. "Don't fix it," she said quickly, reading him. He closed his mouth. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she continued. "I just needed to say it out loud." He forced himself to sit back down. "How do you feel about it?" "Embarrassed," she said. "Stupid." "You're not stupid," he replied gently. "I know," she said, "but I need to handle it myself." He nodded. The urge to step in pulsed again, insistent. He wanted to draft an email for her, to call the manager, to ensure her position was secure. "I trust you to handle it," he said instead. The words felt like releasing something he used to grip tightly. Later that night, alone, he questioned himself. Was this restraint healthy, or was he withdrawing too much? Was he confusing support with silence? The boundaries felt thin, easily crossed from either side. Therapy continued, though less frequently. During one session, he admitted, "I'm afraid that if I don't intervene, she'll fail." "And if she fails?" Kessler asked. "She'll get hurt." "And if you intervene?" Kessler pressed. "She'll feel controlled. So either she risks failure or she risks suffocation," Kessler summarized. Daniel nodded slowly. "Which risk belongs to her?" Kessler asked. He exhaled. "Failure. And which belongs to you?" "Fear." The distinction was simple. Living it was not. Autumn arrived quietly. Lena's confidence seemed to grow. She managed her job responsibilities more smoothly. She began planning a short solo trip to another city with friends. "I'm taking the train," she told him one evening. "How far?" he asked before catching the sharpness in his tone. 3 hours, she replied cautiously. "With who?" "Dad." He stopped. He heard it himself. The interrogation creeping in. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "That came out wrong." She waited. "Who are you going with?" he asked again, softer. "3 friends from the bookstore." "Do I know them?" She hesitated. "Not really." He felt the urge to ask for names, phone numbers, itineraries. "I hope you have a good time," he said, instead. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "I will." But after she left, his mind spiraled. 3 friends he didn't know, a different city, no supervision. He paced the kitchen, feeling the old panic flare. He picked up his phone. He typed, "Send me the train details." He stared at the message. He deleted it. He typed again, "Text me when you arrive." He hesitated. He left it unsent. The night before her trip, he barely slept. The house felt louder than usual, every creak amplified. In the morning, she stopped by briefly to grab a jacket she had left behind. "I'll be back Sunday night," she said. "Okay." She lingered in the doorway. "You look tense," she observed. "I'm fine," he replied. She tilted her head. "You don't have to pretend." He hesitated. Honesty felt risky, but necessary. "I'm worried," he admitted. "About what?" "That something could go wrong." "It always could," she said gently. The simplicity of her response disarmed him. "I trust you," he added. She studied his face carefully. "Do you?" "Yes," he said. She nodded slowly. "Then let me go." The phrase echoed like a memory of the kitchen. But this time, there was no wrist, no grip, just space. He stepped fully away from the doorway. "I will," he said. She left without incident. The door closed softly behind her. The next 2 days stretched unbearably long. He checked his phone constantly but resisted initiating contact. Late Saturday evening, a message appeared. "Made it. Cities loud but fun." Relief flooded him so intensely he had to sit down. Sunday night, she returned safely. She looked energized, different somehow. "How was it?" he asked. "Good," she said. "Really good." He noticed a subtle shift. She carried herself with more certainty. "Thank you for not hovering," she added. The acknowledgement felt significant, but progress carried unintended consequences. Mara called a few days later, her voice tight. "You're being too hands-off," she said. "What do you mean?" "She told me you didn't even ask for her train details." "I didn't want to pressure her," he replied. "She's still 16, Mara insisted. Boundaries don't mean absence. The criticism stung because it carried truth. He had swung from control to near detachment at times, unsure where the balance lay. "I'm trying not to repeat old patterns," he said. "And in doing that, you're creating new ones," Mara replied. The comment lingered long after the call ended. At the next family therapy session, Lena brought it up herself. I don't want you to disappear, she said. I'm not disappearing, Daniel replied. Sometimes it feels like you're afraid to say anything, she explained. Like you're walking on eggshells. He considered that. I am, he admitted. She sighed. I don't need silence. I need respect. The distinction landed sharply. Respect means you can ask questions, she continued. Just don't corner me. The word cornered resurfaced, heavy and familiar. I can do that, he said carefully. Can you? She asked. He met her gaze. I'll try. Don't just try, she replied. Notice when you shift. It felt like a challenge, a necessary one. The next time she mentioned something potentially risky, he practiced asking one question and stopping. I'm thinking about getting a tattoo, she said casually one evening. His pulse jumped. Images of permanence flooded his mind. Where? He asked. Small one, on my wrist. His gaze flicked unconsciously to her wrist. The memory of his own grip flashed. What does it mean? He asked, keeping his tone even. It's a reminder, she said, of not letting people hold me in place. The statement hit him like a physical blow. He swallowed. That's powerful. She watched him closely. I won't stop you, he said. She nodded slowly. I didn't expect you to. But later that night, alone, he stared at his own hands for a long time. The idea that his grip had become symbolic in her life unsettled him deeply. Winter approached. The gap year was halfway over. College applications loomed again. One evening, Lena arrived unexpectedly upset. I got rejected, she said. From where? From the program I wanted. He felt the familiar surge of protective anger. They don't know what they're missing, he began. She shook her head. It's not about that. Then what? I don't know who I am without the plan, she said quietly. He sat down across from her. I don't either, he admitted. She looked at him, surprised. I used to know exactly who I was, he continued. The one who fixed things. The one who had answers. And now? She asked. Now I'm not sure. The vulnerability in his voice felt unfamiliar, but necessary. She exhaled slowly. Maybe that's okay. The conversation drifted into silence, but not the heavy kind. Something softer, yet the fracture was not gone. A week later, during an argument about finances, he slipped. It was subtle. His tone sharpened. His posture leaned forward. His voice filled the room. You need to be realistic, he said firmly. Her shoulders tightened instantly. There it is. He stopped mid-sentence. I'm not cornering you, he insisted. You're pressing, she replied. He leaned back immediately, hands open. You're right. The shift was quick, but the damage had already flickered in her eyes. You see how fast it comes back? She asked. Yes, he said quietly. The honesty felt raw. She stood up. For a split second, his body reacted as it once would have, a reflexive tightening as if preparing to stand too. He stayed seated. She walked to the doorway. She paused. I need air, she said. You have it, he replied. She left. He remained in the chair, heart pounding. The old impulse had surged so naturally it frightened him. Change was not a straight path. It was a constant negotiation with instinct. Hours later, she texted, I'm okay. He responded, take your time. The next day, she returned. I noticed you didn't follow, she said. I wanted to, he admitted. She nodded slowly. I know. There was something in that acknowledgement that felt both fragile and resilient. Spring approached again. Nearly a year since the fall. The kitchen tile had been replaced during a renovation, not because it was damaged beyond repair, but because Daniel couldn't bear the sight of it anymore. The new tile was lighter, less severe. One evening, Lena stood in the kitchen with him for the first time in months. It looks different, she said. Yes. She ran her foot lightly across the new surface. Do you still think about it? She asked. Every day, he replied. She nodded. I don't, she said quietly. The statement startled him. It's not the fall I think about, she continued. It's before. He swallowed. I know. They stood in silence for a moment. I don't want to define us by that night, she said. Neither do I, he replied. But I also don't want to forget it, she added. He understood. Forgetting would mean ignoring the pattern that led there. I won't, he said. She looked at him steadily. Then don't go back. I'm trying, he replied. I know, she said. The words were simple. They were not absolution. They were not peace. But they were not fear either. And still, beneath everything, the fracture remained. Not sharp, not bleeding, but present, waiting to see which version of him would prevail when pressure rose again. Pressure did not announce itself when it returned. It arrived disguised as something reasonable. something responsible, something that sounded like love. It came the afternoon. Lena told him she had decided to defer college another year. They were sitting at the kitchen table. The new tile reflected the late light softly, almost forgiving. She spoke calmly, almost casually. "I'm not ready," she said. "I want more time." His chest tightened immediately, not in anger, in fear. "More time for what?" he asked. "For figuring out what I want," she replied. "You've had a year," he said, before he could stop himself. She went still. There it was, the subtle shift, the lean forward, the edge in his voice. "I know," she said slowly, "but I need another." He felt the old narrative assembling itself in his mind. Financial instability. Lost momentum. The world moving forward without her. "That's risky," he said. She inhaled carefully. "Dad, I'm just saying," he continued, his tone growing firmer. "You can't drift forever." Her shoulders tightened. He saw it. He saw the old dynamic flicker into place like a switch flipped in a dark room. "You said you wouldn't corner me," she said. "I'm not cornering you," he replied automatically. "You are," she said quietly. "It feels like it." The air in the kitchen thickened. The memory of the fall hovered invisibly between them. He felt the instinct rise, hot and insistent. To press, to win, to assert that he was right. He stood up. For one split second, the motion was ambiguous. Even to him. She stood up too. The space between them narrowed. The old pattern hummed beneath his skin. Proximity, dominance, certainty. Then he saw it. Not her body this time. Not the wrist. He saw her eyes. Not defiant. Not furious. Alert. Ready. As if bracing for impact that had not yet happened. He froze. His hands were at his sides. Not reaching. Not gripping. But the intent was there. In his posture. In his stance. He stepped back. Not 1 inch. Not subtly. Fully. He moved until his back hit the counter. "I'm doing it again," he said. She did not move. "You are," she replied. He felt his heartbeat in his throat. The pressure was still there. The urge to reclaim control had not disappeared. It had simply been interrupted. "I'm scared," he said finally. She blinked, surprised. "Of what?" she asked. "That if you don't choose something solid soon, you'll drift away from me completely," he admitted. The words hung in the air, unpolished and exposed. She stared at him for a long moment. "Do you hear that?" she asked gently. "Hear what?" "You're afraid I'll drift away. So you push me towards something you can measure." He swallowed. "College is measurable," she continued. "A plan is measurable. Staying here, figuring it out, isn't. I just don't want you to struggle," he said. "I will struggle," she replied. "That's not the worst thing." The simplicity of her response cracked something inside him. He realized then that his fear was not about her failure. It was about his irrelevance. If she drifted into uncertainty, he could not guide her. If she took a path he did not understand, he could not evaluate it. And if he could not evaluate it, he could not control his anxiety. "I don't know how to watch you make uncertain choices," he admitted. She softened slightly. "Then learn," she said. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I almost grabbed the moment again," he said quietly. "You didn't," she replied. "That doesn't mean it wasn't there." She nodded. "It probably always will be." The statement did not accuse. It acknowledged reality. They stood there for several seconds without speaking. "I'm not asking for permission," she said eventually. "I'm asking for space to decide." He looked at her. Really looked at her. Not as something slipping away. Not as something to hold in place. As someone separate. "You have space," he said. Her gaze searched his face, looking for cracks. "I mean it," he added. She exhaled slowly. "Okay." She picked up her bag and moved toward the door. He stayed where he was. She paused in the doorway. "I'm not drifting away," she said. "I'm just not orbiting you." The metaphor lingered long after she left. That night, he did not pace. He did not replay the argument obsessively. He sat in the living room and allowed the discomfort to exist without trying to neutralize it. The next day, he called Kessler. "I almost lost it yesterday," he said. "But you didn't," Kessler replied. "It felt like I did." "What stopped you?" "Her eyes," he admitted. "I saw her bracing." "And how did that feel?" "Like I was about to become the man I said I wouldn't be." Kessler was quiet for a moment. "Change isn't the absence of impulse," he said finally. "It's the interruption of it." The sentence settled differently than the others had. Not accusatory, not diagnostic, observational. "Will it always be there?" Daniel asked. "Yes," Kessler said, "but it doesn't have to win." Weeks passed. Lena took on more shifts at the bookstore. She applied for internships. She explored options that did not align neatly with any measurable path Daniel would have once approved. He practiced asking, "What draws you to that?" instead of, "Is that realistic?" Sometimes he failed. Once, during a tense conversation about money, his voice rose too sharply. She stepped back instinctively. He noticed immediately. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're loud," she replied. "I know." He lowered his voice deliberately. It felt artificial at first, like performance. But gradually, it became less forced. One evening, she stayed for dinner. They cooked together in the kitchen, the new tile cool underfoot. She reached for a knife, and for a fleeting second, he saw her wrist, the place where she had once mentioned the tattoo. She had gotten it, a small, delicate line circling her wrist. Not tight, not closed. "What does it mean?" he asked softly. She looked at it. "It's not a closed circle," she said. "It's open." He nodded. "I didn't want something that trapped itself," she added. He understood. "I'm glad it's open," he said. She met his eyes. "So am I." There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace, just a shift, subtle, but real. Later that night, after she left, he stood in the kitchen alone again. He placed his hand lightly against the counter where he had once gripped her wrist. He did not flinch this time. He did not whisper apologies into empty air. He simply acknowledged the space. The house no longer felt like a crime scene. It felt like a place where something had broken and been examined honestly. Not fixed, but examined. Months later, Lena received an acceptance letter to a program she had applied to almost impulsively. "It's in another state," she said. He felt the familiar tightening. "How far?" he asked, catching himself. "Far enough," she replied with a small smile. He inhaled slowly. "When would you leave?" "End of summer." He nodded. "Are you excited?" he asked. "Yes." "Are you scared?" "Yes." He smiled faintly. "That sounds right." She studied him carefully. "You're not going to try to talk me out of it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." "Why?" He considered the question carefully. "Because if I try to hold you here, I'll lose you anyway," he said. The words felt true in a way that surprised him. She stepped closer. Not cautiously, not bracing, just closer. "I don't want to lose you either," she said. He felt something inside him shift. Not relief, not triumph, something quieter. Acceptance. "I know," he said. The weeks before her departure were busy. Packing, planning, logistics. He helped, but he asked before stepping in. "Do you want help with this?" he would say. Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. He learned to tolerate both answers. The morning she left, they stood in the driveway. Her bags were packed. The car idled softly. He felt the old fear flicker once more. The instinct to say, "Stay." The instinct to outline contingencies. To warn, to advise. Instead, he said, "Call me if you need anything." She smiled. "I will." She hugged him, not cautiously, not briefly, fully. He let his arms wrap around her, not to hold without gripping. When she pulled away, there was no tension in her shoulders. She got into the car. As she drove away, he stood in the driveway and let her go. Not as an act of surrender, as an act of trust. The house felt different when he walked back inside. Quieter, but not hollow. He walked into the kitchen one last time before sitting down. The tile was cool under his feet. He placed his hands flat on the counter. They were steady. The impulse had not disappeared. It probably never would, but it no longer ruled him. He looked around the room, where everything had fractured, and for the first time, he did not see the fall. He saw the moment he stepped back, and he understood that stepping back was not weakness. It was the only way forward.